Hey, and welcome back. Now it's time for another episode of Intermission. So, where I last left off, I was talking about getting started. Well, now we're on to the next step. Let's say you finally made your commitment, and now you're starting to get into the hobby. Where do you start for tools? Well, this is where I'm going to start. Going to give you a start here, and it's going to be pretty simple. You don't need anything advanced right now since you're just starting out. So here's what we're going to start with. So first thing you're going to need is paintbrushes. There's kinds of paintbrushes available. You don't have to go crazy with paintbrushes. You don't have to go get like a fan brush or anything. Most you need is small liners, like small brushes like this. You need this for detail, bigger ones for big projects like this, and maybe a couple flats. I have a couple of them somewhere, but yeah, you don't need anything fancy. You don't have to go pick up fan brushes. You don't have to pick up any magical camel hair airbrushes. Yeah, magical paint brushes. All you really need is just the basics. You can nice mid-range work. However, you want better quality when you're painting. You're gonna have to pay the price. So you don't really need anything fancy though. Just a basic paintbrush set. You can get them at craft stores. You can get them in your hobby shops. Sometimes you might find them at other stores. I use, like I said, I pick up variety packs, so pick up stuff like this. You can use Lone Cornell, Royal Langnickel, but you don't have to go really fancy. You could use synthetic hair brushes, you could use sable hair, but they also cost. So nice mid-range price will start. And the next step, now you gotta go glue. Okay, what kind of glue do you need? You don't need Elmer's glue unless you're dealing with clear parts. And you don't need super glue yet. Well, at least not yet. I'll explain that in a future video as your tools expand. Basically, what you need, you use something like this. This is a Model Master liquid cement. Now, you can go with the plain old Tester's tube glue, but that is a difficult glue to begin with for a simple reason. It's because it's kind of like a mutation between mozzarella and some sort of other glue. It's not an easy thing to use, and also it doesn't adhere too well. But I found this works pretty good for most projects because it's a precision applicator. Make sure you keep a wire cleaner on hand for this because it's got a metal tip. Testers also makes a cheaper version of this, so you can always find one of these. But be wary, too much glue will eat the plastic and it'll make it sink. There's also liquid cement, which is the other option. This is a little tricky to use. You gotta learn how to use it. It's almost kind of like using a welder, in a sense. You can apply it with a paintbrush, precision application, paintbrush. Make sure when you're gluing though, that you have no paint on the plastic, especially when you're doing the mating surfaces like your model cars or your model tanks or something. You apply a little bit, give it a second or two, and then you squeeze. What it does is it melts the plastic and then it fuses together, kind of like a weld. And it works pretty good. But it's real tricky. But once you get the hang of it, you wonder where you have it. You'll wonder, where's this been all your life once you start going? The other glue, on the other hand, this is more for slow setting and for adjusting parts. It's a slow setting solution. It's actually, and as I said before, it's very good if you know how to use it. It's pretty precise. Now, liquid cement, there's actually a couple formulas you got. You got the 10X7R plastic weld. Flexifile also makes a bottle of liquid cement here. There's more, but it also costs more. It's like $6 a bottle. You can also use, now, two types of formula. You have this, which is kind of a hot formula. Testers has one in a similar formula. This is the Tamiya Extra Thin Cement. You don't have to go with these. Pick and choose your arsenal wisely. Now, I call this one a cold formula because if it touches the skin, it feels like it's freezing. Make sure you have proper coverage when you're on your hands or something, because you don't, like everything else, it's toxic. So you gotta make sure it doesn't affect your skin. And this one, like I said, this one's a little bit more of a hot formula. Use this wisely and sparingly. Now, what are you gonna do to get all the plastic, get all the parts off the sprue? Well, this is what I use. This is a sprue cutter. You can get these at your hobby shop. You can get these at hardware stores. Hardware stores have more of bigger stuff. They also have wire cutters. And and these work really good because when you use these, parts don't go flying off the sprue tree. And clean up anything. You could use a scalpel. You could use a hobby knife here. Now this one is what I use. This is a X-Acto handle and X-Acto blade, number 11. The number 11 is a multi-purpose. And this is also the most common type of blade. You can get these in 5-packs. You can get these in a whole box. However, be very, very careful. It is razor sharp. It's sharper than most chef knives. I've actually, in my 25 years of model building, I can actually say I'm lucky. I've only cut myself a handful of times, but these things are really sharp and they're really, really dangerous. And if you have kids, keep these out of reach. They will do a lot of damage. It's sharp like a scalpel, and it's almost like a surgical scalpel. I've had fellow modelers end up getting stitches, sometimes even like reconstructive surgery. Although that's very slim of that happening, but you got to be careful with these. They're incredibly sharp. But once you get the hang of these are the greatest tools ever. Now, once you get your paints, you get your brushes, get your glue, it's time to move on to paint. So, what kind of paint are you going to use? Well, in the hobby, you have two kinds. You have enamel and you have acrylics. Now, enamel is not a water-based. It's an oil-based. It does have its advantages, though. It's got good coverage. It's solid, but unfortunately, they're starting to become less and less common in the hobby. The only ones that really are available are Extra Color out of England, Humbrol out of England, and of course, testers. Testers are readily available. You can get them at your craft store. You can get them at a hobby shop. And they come in two kinds. Testers actually makes a generic color set, and they make a military and automotive color set, which are really, really nice, but once again, they're not that easy to clean. You can't just wipe them up. You need a certain kind of thinner, and you need a brush cleaner to clean them off your brushes, especially with the brush cleaner, because if you don't, you'll end up throwing away your brushes. Now, acrylics, on the other hand, they're actually acrylic, as you already know, is a type of plastic, and acrylic paints are also water-based, which makes it clean up a lot easier. And if they get stuck on brushes, art stores make a brush cleaner. Though I should say craft stores and art supply stores have a brush cleaner that can clean them out. But if you let them sit on too long, it might not work. You may have to resort to the lacquer thinner to clear out your brushes, and you don't want to get to that point yet. Not yet. However, be wary with acrylics, because even though most of them are water-based, some of them might be alcohol-based, like Tamiya and Gunsanyo. So, which means even though you can clean out your brushes with water, or you can clean up the area, they're still kind of delicate to use when you're painting. So you got to be very, very careful with them. Not so much careful, but you got to be wary. But most acrylics are water-based, like Vallejo, testers. Vallejo over here, for example, and then you have testers. This is actually one of Tester's acrylic bottles. If you pick up testers, be wary of the label and read them. Most of the time, testers color codes these things relatively easy. For example, blue would be acrylic, red or orange would be enamel. There's also Life Color here. This is also water-based. Now, Life Color is kind of difficult to get. You can only get them in hobby shops or online. Testers is more readily available, so they're easier to get. And now that acrylics are starting to become very big in the industry, in the hobby, I should say, but they're also not that cheap, but they're easier to pick up. You have Humbrol, you have Testers, you have Life Color, you have Vallejo. Excuse me. There's also, if you could find them, you have AK Interactive, Akan, which is out of Ukraine, and a couple of other companies. And the beauty of acrylics is they're not as toxic as enamels. They're actually pretty easy to work with. They don't cover as well as enamels, but the advantage they have over enamels is, well, enamels, you can do a second coat when you're painting. It does run the risk of lifting the other coat underneath. Whereas acrylics, you're dry to the touch, you put on a second coat, you're good, ready to go. And also with acrylics is full curing time, depending, can range anywhere from just a couple hours to a full 24 hours. I would recommend a full 24 hours for the paint to fully cure, so this way you can move on to the next coat or put a top coat underneath. But what if you're doing bigger projects that require more paint? Well, they do make spray cans. Testers make a wide variety of spray cans. They're not that big though. They're mostly small like this. Tamai also makes spray cans, but be wary. Once again, most of these spray paints are in an enamel. In Tamaya's case, it's a lacquer, and they're a lot more toxic, which means you're gonna need a lot of ventilation. So make sure you're in an area that has a window, a couple fans, because you mess with this stuff long enough, and painters will tell you this, the fumes will get to your head. Now the good thing about spray cans is you could do 1-2 projects at a time. But the problem is, since you only got a limited amount, most you could do is maybe 2 large projects. Maybe. So you gotta be very wary with it. And also another disadvantage about using a spray can is the longer drying time. Especially if you're doing flat paints, or particularly if you're doing gloss paints. Gloss paints, enamel paints take a long time to dry. Could range anywhere from 4 hours to 2 days, especially if you're building a car model. That's right there which means you're going to need patience for it. I also recommend having, of course, if you're using acrylics, I recommend having a jar of water to clear out your brushes. If you're using enamels, once again, you're going to need a brush cleaner or a thinner. Now, with enamels, you can't just use any thinner. You got to be wary of what to use. What I recommend is if you're using a specific brand of paint, I recommend using their brand of thinner, because the formula of the paint matches the thinner. And this is important, particularly important for enamels in general, with testers, Humbrol, extra color. Those are good examples. Whereas the water? The acrylic paints, you just run around with you can actually just run around with water. However, thinning them, I do recommend using the brand thinner, which is, even though it's acrylic, it's specifically mixed for the acrylic paint. Their thinners are specifically mixed for acrylics. For example, the Life Color, much more water-based. I had to pick up a container of thinner for it. Works very well. If you can't really find those, you can always go to the local supermarket. You can go to a hardware store or a drugstore. They have distilled water. Now, the distilled water, it's actually works very good. You could use tap water, but I would recommend against it because it might do something funky with the paint. So you can always use distilled water for thinning your paints or whatever. Anything else? Well, of course, there's putty. I wouldn't recommend using the putty until you start getting very comfortable with the model building. Now, what putty does is putty fills in gaps, cracks, seams. But once again, much like enamels, it's toxic. You're going to need plenty of space and ventilation to use this stuff. Putty is a lot like spackling. If you do auto body, you know a lot about putty. You know how to work it. Multiple thin layers, of course. You can't do it thick because it'll take forever to dry. But in thin layers, drying time goes anywhere from 2 hours to a full 24 hours. But you can't just use any kind of putty. You can't just use glazing putty or an automotive. You could use automotive putty, but you got to take your time with it. I've heard many modelers have success using like Bondo or 3M acrylic putty, but in the hobby, they make a specific putty which is a very fine filler and a very fine grain, which is perfect for filling gaps in styrene, like Tamaya putty. Testers makes putty. There's Squadron Green stuff. I still have a tube of that somewhere around there. Not a bad putty. There's Stucco, which is a putty from out in Europe, which is perfect for this kind of stuff. But the Tamaya seems most ideal because it's specifically geared towards styrene. But like I said before, I don't recommend using it until you get very comfortable with the hobby, especially going even further. And I think I shouldn't say last but not least, very important, one of them, masking tape. Now, masking tape can be your best friend or your worst enemy. It depends on how you use it. You can get masking tape anywhere. You can go to the local dollar store, but be wary. Sometimes with masking tape, the adhesion might be too strong, especially if you're using acrylic paints. It can lift the paint off. You got to be very careful with this. What I recommend doing is when you're looking for masking tape to work with your hobby, find one with a lower adhesion rate. Like 3M blue tape is actually pretty good. I checked the label, see the adhesion on these. So since I use acrylic paints, this way they won't lift the paint. They're less likely to lift the paint, especially if they're fully dried. Tamaya also makes some. If you go to the hobby shop, Tamaya makes a good tape. This is a good one here. It comes in a dispenser. They come in a variety of widths, sizes, and how much you need. However, better the quality, you're going to pay the price. And Tamaya masking tape is a very good masking tape. And, of course, you're going to need clamps, tweezers. You don't need massively big tweezers. You can always steal your wife's tweezers, but don't let her find out. I use these. These are actually pretty decent. These are squeeze tweezers types. I use these for small stuff or trying to grab small little things. As you can tell here, this is. You can find these at your local hobby shop. They do make a variety of these. Some of them have an extension, some of them have a bent edge, some of them have flat ends, which might make life a lot easier. Just make sure you have a decent grip on these, because I've had many small parts fly because I didn't grab with these properly. I mean, you can use regular tweezers, which makes life a lot easier, but they don't have the hold in place like the regular tweezers do. Clamps, of course. You can go to the hardware store for these. You don't need to go bonkers in the size. These are actually ideal for putting frames together and the like. Of course, like everything else, just be careful. Might slip, might do some damage. So be careful. Gently place them when you put them. Gently place them on. Take the time. Make sure they don't squeeze too hard, because you might have more deformities, which leads to more work. That's what you don't want. Let's see if there's anything else do I have to cover. Paints, brushes. I think that's about it for now. Oh, of course, find an area in the house that you prefer. You can use your garage. You can have a bench. I work on my workbench here downstairs, which I also use for little house projects. Light, of course, plenty of light here. I use LEDs down here, but I use the daytime because they're ideal for what colors I'm working on. A couple of lamps. I got 2 of them here. And if you wear glasses, make sure you use them. In my case, I didn't need glasses for a long while. You don't need anything fancy unless you actually wear prescription glasses. I just use these local Walmart drugstore. Magnifying makes life a little bit easier when I'm building. Unfortunately, as long as I've been welding, I've been a welder for a long time, so my eyesight's finally starting to go. I use a pair of those for any small work. Of course, paper towels, regular towels for cleanup. Make sure you have those, and a drop cloth. If you're going to work on the kitchen table, make sure you have a drop cloth. Testors actually has starter sets which cover most of the tools you need. Of course, I also forgot another important thing. Use sanding sticks. You can do the hobby shop. If you can't find sanding sticks or sandpaper at your local hobby shop, craft stores have got them. And if you need more smaller work, you can always go to a beauty supply store or the beauty care section of the drugstore or supermarket. Pick these up. They're a little bit cheaper. They don't last as long, but you got to remember, usually nail files are. I can get a variety of pack of these, and they last maybe about 2-3 models depending on what I'm working on. So you can always make sure you have those. Of course, variety of grits. Of course. Sorry for repeating myself. Make sure you have those. Have a finer grit for like finishing work, and if necessary, because when you're working on your first model, sometimes the mold release agents can be very greasy. You can get away with it if you're painting enamel. You can't do that with acrylic because, once again, water-based, fragile. You can always get yourself a bottle of rubbing alcohol. You don't need 91%. I mostly use this for clearing out my airbrush, which I'll explain in a future video. You could use this to wipe off any excess mold release oils on the plastic. And of course, paper towels. So those are the basics you can use. This is all the basics you need for now. Once you start committing more and more, and you start getting better and better, you're going to have to expand your tools, which I will explain in a future intermission video. But this is what I got for now. I will talk to you guys again. Happy modeling. Take it easy, and hope to hear from you guys soon.